So I just want to welcome you all to November's CityThink. Our topic this month is the Nashville Nine, and that's presented by Historic Nashville Inc. We have David Price here today, who's the president. And just on a side note before we start with the program, if you're interested in downtown architecture, specifically some historic buildings and a mix of contemporary and historic, the Design Center has recently completed a walking tour of downtown, urban design walking tour, and we have those available here for purchase. But it's a nice overview. It frames the downtown walking experience in the view of the 10 principles of the plan of Nashville. So it's sort of like a field guide out seeing the city and seeing the principles at work. So if you're interested in one of those, also if you're a member of the Design Center, this is one of the perks of membership. Okay. All right, David.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks everybody for coming. Welcome. If I don't speak loud enough, just let me know and I'll try and improve my tones. Yeah. A little more about me. I've been on the board of Historic Nashville for 3 years now, the last 2 as board president, as we've been re-energizing the organization and getting some programs going and recruiting new board members. It's an organization that dates to 1968 and was very sort of a powerful player in Nashville until about 2001 or 2002, when the Historic Nashville went into sort of an unfortunate period of dormancy when there wasn't a lot going on. Our paid staff person was lost and the board sort of fell apart. So for the past 2 years we've been struggling, but being very successful at sort of re-energizing Historic Nashville. It's been a lot of fun, very rewarding for me. Several of my board members are here today. Thank you for coming. I'm originally from Alabama, but I've been in Tennessee for quite a while. I went to I did my undergraduate work at Sewanee and graduate MA in history in the Historic Preservation Public History program at MTSU. And I currently work for a consulting firm, cultural resource management consulting firm called New South Associates. We do archaeology and preservation consulting all over the Southeast, and I work at a branch office here in Nashville. We're based in Stone Mountain, so pretty immersed in the world of historic preservation, and glad to contribute to Nashville in any ways that I can through Historic Nashville. So today I'm going to talk about a program that Historic Nashville H&I used to do up through the late 90s, I'm pretty sure. We call it the Nashville Nine. It wasn't called that originally, but it's an annual list of endangered historic properties that are nominated by the public through our website, historicnashvilleinc.org. We also keep through the year board members and those of us on the committee, including Tara Milnick, who's not a board member, but she's on our committee for the Nashville Nine. We keep a sort of a running list of properties that we're keeping a watch on around town, and those also tend to get nominated to the list also. So these are properties that are threatened by demolition, neglect, and development. It's very similar to the kind of efforts that the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the Tennessee Preservation Trust do on the national and state levels. You can see the general ideas that we promote public awareness and conversation in the media and among people about our historic surroundings, and especially bring attention to those properties that are endangered. And it also helps us, as a local advocacy organization for preservation, it helps us prioritize what properties we would like to try and work with property owners or public officials, those who are in a position to make a difference and help improve the situation for these buildings. So we'll get into, I'm just going to give you an overview of the 2009 list, which was our inaugural list after having the program been dormant for so long. First of which, I'll sort of lead off with a few losses that we've had just recently. Those of you who maybe live in East Nashville or are familiar, I know Sarah is, familiar with Silverdine, which most recently was a furniture resale shop and homeless flop house. It's right across the street from Main Street Liquors, which I can't remember his name right now, but the owner of the liquor store also owns this property, and for years has obviously committed what we call demolition by neglect. He allowed homeless people to start fires and basically camp in the house. There was a major fire a couple of years ago on a cold winter night when somebody had lit a fire inside the house. And since that time, the house it rapidly deteriorated to the point that where it was not really feasible to renovate or restore it. So the Metro Historical Commission struck a deal with the Tennessee State Museum to salvage materials, and it's currently, those materials are currently being pulled out of the building, I think. I don't think it's been demolished yet, but I haven't driven by in the past few days, but it's, no. It's imminent. It's going to be coming down. It's an 1860s, formerly country house when East Nashville was still part of the country. You know, could be argued it was modeled after Jackson's Hermitage in terms of the architectural style. Also, I think, I heard, I don't know what the source is, but for a period, it served as a motel along Main Street down the Pike at one point. Anybody stop me if you have any questions or comments, please. Another loss that we recently had that was in the press quite a bit was the Charlotte Avenue Church of Christ, built in 1921. The congregation was elderly and shrinking, couldn't afford the upkeep of the building. They joined with a younger congregation nearby, and the two of them went in on a new property that they purchased with the idea that they would be able to sell this and put the money into their new building. It was on the market for a number of years, 2 or 3 years without selling. The congregation was determined that it had to tear the building down in order to sell the property against the protests of neighborhood people, the council person, Historic Nashville, Metro Historical Commission. We tried working with the owner and with the broker on alternatives to demolition, sweet deals for upzoning the property if they wanted to redevelop it, but nothing, they wouldn't listen to anything. So I think a month or two ago it was finally raised. There's a nice historic photo of it in the 50s before the, I guess around 1960 addition was put on the back of the building. The Arcade Post Office. The Arcade has had a post office in it since its beginning. While the interior of the building, or the interior of the post office has been renovated a number of times, I'm sure. The exterior has a pretty neat sort of Art Deco style to it. And this was an interesting property in that the post office itself, yes, is a historic entity in the arcade, but more important, or also why we listed it on the Nashville Nine, is it's sort of the heartbeat of the arcade itself. It generates a lot of foot traffic, which brings people in for lunch and other necessities during the day. And the arcade itself is a very unique historic resource for downtown Nashville. I think it might be one of the only ones in the country, if not the only one in the country. So that was listed with the idea that the post office needs to stay around to generate that sort of that daily foot traffic that keeps the arcade a viable resource. Now into another one of our, and I should say that it was a success story that the U.S. Postal Service did at first considered closing the branch because of decreased usage, but due to public pressure, they reneged on that option and decided to keep it. Another success story, at least for the time being, is Mount Olivet Cemetery Chapel. Perhaps designed by Hugh Cathcart Thompson, the same architect who designed the Ryman. Certainly dates from a similar time period and similar architectural style and details. Has not been used since the mid-90s by the company that operates Mount Olivet Cemetery. They built a new building down by Lebanon Pike that they use now as their modern sort of office and receiving area for families and funerals. And since that time, they've again, it's another case of demolition by neglect. The roof is leaking. It's got structural problems. All of the original cemetery records, paper records, are moldering in the attic of this building. It's really a shame. A year or two ago, the company pulled a demolition permit to tear the building down for liability purposes. The Historical Commission, Tim Walker, the Director of the Historical Commission, got wind of this proposed demolition, and we began negotiations with the company that runs the cemetery, along with the Tennessee Preservation Trust. And as a result of these negotiations, they did agree to pull the demolition permit. They've secured the building. They've boarded up the windows so vagrants and other people can't get inside. put a fence around the building, but they still haven't done any roof repairs or structural repair or come up with any sort of long-term plan about what they're going to do with the building. So we hope we've bought some time. That's all that we could do at this point, is just buy time for the building. It's really a gem of a small historic building that's out of the public value, but you can't see it from the road. You have to go up into the cemetery to actually see the building. It's a real gem, and we'd be ashamed to lose it, especially structurally. It's a sound building. It just needs a new roof and obviously a lot of rehab also, but structurally it's perfectly rehabable. It could be done with some investment, some creativity. We floated the idea to the cemetery that they could use it as a columbarium or some sort of community space, which they do have a precedent for. They have another structure on the grounds that they lease for $1 a year to the Sons of Confederate Veterans, who use it as a gathering place. So there are options out there. We'll see. Haven't heard anything lately from it.
Did I have a question?
Yeah.
How large is that building?
Square foot wise, the original is not very big. It would be difficult to repurpose it for a modern office because the rooms are really small. But it's got a pretty substantial, you can see just the corner of the 1940s addition, which goes all the way across the back and actually extends beyond this, and you can't see it in this picture. But it's got some considerable square footage. I don't know, I would say maybe 3,000 or 4,000 square feet. Any other questions?
It's 2 stories on the back side.
Yeah, and it is a 2-story. This sits on a hill, and so you can see there is a second ground story and another story here.
How much parking is around it? What kind of parking?
It doesn't really have any parking. We just sort of park on the side of the cemetery road. But there's plenty of room. I mean, if you wanted to have an event, people might have to hike a little bit.
Yeah.
Next is the McCampbell House. I'm sorry I didn't have a better photo of this. An early federal period brick house in Donaldson, very near the Clover Bottom Mansion where the Tennessee Historical Commission is located. Is in remarkably good shape. It's got some water damage coming in through the eaves, but has been, the house, correct me, those of you in the know if I get any details wrong, but was donated through or willed to the State Museum, Tennessee State Museum, by the former owner. And they have gone through a pretty extensive public input process with some public meetings at Clover Bottom and working with local representatives and Metro Council people to come up with a plan of what to do with the building. I'm not sure what the latest on that is, but there are a lot of people involved, including the Historical Commission, the State Museum, and it will be rehabbed. This picture was taken before the yard was actually cleaned up a bit, and trees were, some of the shrubs and weeds and everything were cleared away from the building, and a basic sort of introductory building assessment has been done, although not a full historic structure report. But I believe it's going to be in good hands and should be another one to put in our saved column. Unfortunately, when they did the yard work, I went out there a few months ago with staff of the State and Metro Historical Commission. There is at least one burial in the backyard. I can't remember exactly who, but one of the former residents. And there was some question. Nobody knows exactly where that burial is, but the bobcats and heavy machinery they had out there totally messed up the yard and the rear and sort of what might have been traditional boundary markers or plantings, rock walls, that kind of thing, brick. It's all sort of scraped away. So what clues people have used to find that burial are no longer apparent.
How big is the property? It's
about a half acre, I would say. And it's surrounded now by a probably 1940s or 50s residential neighborhood of little minimal traditional brick houses. I think ideally my preference as a person would be for the State Museum to renovate this house and sell it to a private owner to continue as a residence rather than some sort of community center or God forbid another house museum. That would be, because it's already in a residential neighborhood, I don't know that the neighbors would really tolerate something that's going to generate a lot of visitors, that kind of thing.
It was recently listed in the Nashville Register.
and it was recently listed on the National Register of Historic Places.
If the state did something like that, could they have a easement on it so that it stay always?
We could, Historic Nashville has a historic easement program where we could take an easement on the property. Metro could also designate it as a local landmark, which would prevent future demolition. So there's a lot of options for its preservation. This one is sort of we wanted to have another good historic house on the Nashville Nine. Never got a whole lot of information about it. Generally considered threatened because the current owners subdivided the property. It's a large residential property off of Brick Church Pike near I-24. It has been subdivided for development, but doesn't seem to be any movement on actually developing the property. I don't remember how big it is. It's a few hundred acres though, is that right, Terry? Maybe 300-acre property with the Jacks, this sort of Queen Anne farmhouse on the property. I got several calls from this because apparently there's another house known as the Jackson House in the area, but it's a different house. So, I apologize for this photo. It sort of cropped out the sides. The home for aged Masons was built in 1913 by the Masonic Lodge Fraternal Order, the Masons, as a home for crippled disabled senior Masons as well as orphans and widows, I believe. It's actually a complex of buildings, and this is the main central building, I believe. The state now owns it and hasn't been doing anything with it as far as I know. Latest I heard, there were plans for renovation or rehab to a new use, but those, I think, have been shelved for the moment. Last I heard, it's got a sizable population of pigeons living in the attic. It's a wonderful limestone, sort of colonial revival building. Could serve a number of purposes. It's off of Hart Lane in Inglewood. Really great property. A fun category that we did, kind of knowing would generate a lot of publicity and attention, were historic neon signs, which everybody loves from the 50s and 60s and on up into the 70s even. They are expensive to maintain, difficult to maintain. They can often be liability to property owners if they've gotten to the point that they're no longer reparable. As we saw recently with the, what's the sporting goods store on 8th Avenue? Walter Nippers, thank you. Sporting goods on 8th Avenue, you might remember, they had a fantastic neon sign with a trout on it. It was really sort of an icon from downtown, right next to the Standard restaurant. Their insurance company told them they would no longer cover the building if they didn't remove the sign, so they had to remove it. Weiss Liquors is on Main Street in Nashville, maybe my favorite neon sign in all of town. They're just, this was one of our first kind of efforts to bring to the Nashville Nine examples of recent past properties from the 50s and 60s. Those kinds of things that maybe your average citizen who doesn't follow historic preservation or what have you might not consider as a historic part of our built environment. But certainly they are. They speak to our history of roadside architecture and also a sense of playfulness, artfulness of advertising of the mid-20th century. Lots of interesting themes that you could get into there. Historic neighborhood schools was another thematic group of properties that we listed in the 2009 list. Our sort of initial poster building for this group was the Ransom School over in off of West End, which is within, what neighborhood is that, the conservation overlay that it's in? Richland, I think it's in the Richland neighborhood, which was purchased by developers with the intent that they would tear down the school and build a number of condos as infill. They most recently lost their case before Metro Court and are appealing it. They have Tom White as their lawyer, who's a long-time person developers go to when preservation comes into, and preservationists are fighting the demolition. This is the Murphy School, which was purchased by Baptist Hospital several years ago, and was just recently demolished. It's really sad, sort of an under-the-radar property, historic Nashville. We didn't really know what was going on until it was obviously it was too late to do anything about it. Fabulous school, sort of Mediterranean style with original terracotta shingles, original windows, and excellent physical integrity. Very similar to the Bass School in East Nashville, in my neighborhood, architecturally, but it's too late. So, good example of why we initiated this list to try and generate public awareness. So, that's the end of the last year's list. Any questions? No? This year, we had another excellent list of Nashville Nine properties, beginning with obviously Fort Nashboro, and any of you who have been there recently, even within the last year or two, it's in terrible, terrible shape. Metro Parks owns the property and has not budgeted any maintenance or upkeep, apparently, for it. It's an embarrassment to our city. I was there one day and saw a group of German tourists wandering around, and I just had to hang my head in shame. There are holes in the roofs of the buildings. There's rainwater just coming in. It's not being interpreted in any sort of modern way. It's got a very interesting history as a property that was first built by the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1930. Originally built out of either hickory or walnut logs, but by the 50s it had deteriorated to the point that it was rebuilt by Metro, probably with DAR activity also. Unfortunately, rebuilt basically out of telephone poles, creosote pine poles, which have not held up well, either historically or physically. But they were rebuilt in 1962 on the original stone foundations in the same configuration. And for decades was a regular tour stop for, and still is actually, for elementary school kids in Nashville to learn about Nashville's early pioneer history. So even though it's got an interesting history, it has been rebuilt. It's a reconstruction of a reconstruction that's not even in the original spot where Fort Nashboro was, or the original size, or any sort of historical accuracy to it. But still, we felt that it was an important example of what the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, their early history of promoting historic preservation with a mind toward enhancing patriotism and early frontier history of the country. So it's an important example of what the early preservation movement in the 1930s looked like. Yeah.
The very original site was.
There's some speculation of that. It's pretty near this spot, but a little further inland, and some say uphill, where 2nd Avenue is, not where this row of buildings is. I mean, we could be right on top of it. I could be getting a little mixed up in my directions, but
closer to the public square.
Closer to the public square, but not all the way up at the public square, because one of the earliest maps of downtown Nashville that there is available shows a spring, which is no longer there, but of course, for a frontier fort like this, available water was very important. So they actually had a spring. The spring head was inside the fort and flowed outside the fort. At least early illustrations of it show it that way. And so, yeah, it was somewhere right up in here, probably. And anybody from the Historical Commission is welcome to chime in if you want. That's basically, yeah. We don't exactly know where it was. There was no. But this spot was chosen in 1930 by the DAR because it was, there were buildings along the waterfront here. If you look at old Sanborn maps or atlas maps of the city, there was the old jail and various wagon shops and manufacturing concerns right there along here. But by the 30s, they had been demolished and it was vacant. So it was really one of the only spots even nearby where the original fort was to build a reconstruction. So that's why it was chosen. There just wasn't any place to put it at the time.
What about the plans for this?
With the Riverfront Park redevelopment project, I'm sure everybody's familiar with it, which is obviously Nashville is a decade behind the times when it comes to redeveloping the riverfront. It's a very exciting project. The design team and some people on the metro side of plans for the Riverfront Park sort of casually floated the idea of moving Fort Nashboro further sort of up here underneath this tree where there's the demolition statue, and redeveloping this as something else. But basically the idea was that nobody likes Fort Nashboro and wanted it gone. Because it's ugly, it's decrepit, it's not historic, etc. But I think the latest I heard was that those plans have been scrapped and that they're not planning to move Fort Nashboro anymore. Whether or not it will actually be restored or repaired, I don't know. It depends on what happens with Metro Park's budget and how much of a priority the fort is. Does that answer your question? Buildings and structures of Block 2 Park out on Pennington Bend. Again, apologize for this not so good photo. There's a number. This is, I believe, the lock keeper's house, which it's sort of a collection of buildings and structures that date from the 1890s to the 20s. Originally built by the U.S. Corps of Engineers as part of the lock system up and down the Cumberland River. There's a number of interesting structures, flood water level meters, stone walls and stairs, and lots of different interesting things related to history. Again, it's a complicated situation. I believe the case is that the Corps of Engineers owns the land and the structures, but Metro Parks is charged with maintaining them and keeping them up. And so between the two of them, neither has put the money into maintaining them that they should have. So each one can easily blame the other, unfortunately.
Was that affected by the
No, I think it's on high enough ground, which probably a function of its original design. They knew it was going to be a flooded area, so they built it on high ground. Another very familiar landmark on Jefferson is the Geist blacksmith shop, and there's also a residence over here, which is not in the photo, but it's a matching brick, two-story, four-square house. This was in operation as a blacksmith up until recently, up until I believe 2006 or so, and is currently on the market. Obviously needs, I'm sure this roof leaks like a sieve, some structural pulling away here and over the windows, generally unkempt. It's a fantastic little manufacturing building, and would make a great office for historic Nashville, or something like that. It's a real neat little landmark and a nice slice of Nashville's manufacturing history.
What is that? Just curious, do you know what the price is on it?
I don't know. And I don't know if this building and the house are being sold as a unit, or if it's both, individually, or what.
I think it's part of a larger piece of property that's all being trying to be sold together.
Yeah. It's still owned by members of the Geist family.
And it's not protected, right? Because that was excluded from the...
I don't believe it's even listed. Is it listed on the NR? It is. It's listed on the National Register, but that doesn't give it any formal protection. And it's not, we don't have an easement on it or anything like that. It would be a prime candidate for a historic Nashville easement, especially because it's not been renovated yet, which is the best time to put an easement on a property like this. The Junior League Home for Crippled Children is in the Woodland and Waverly neighborhood, right next to 65, near the Douglas Corner neighborhood. It's, again, out of the way. I didn't even know about it until it was nominated for the Nashville Nine. Built in 1928 by the Junior League as a hospital and sort of convalescent home for children with polio. So it's got a very interesting history. historic context of public health and medicine in Nashville, and philanthropy. It's a wonderful little colonial revival brick building with a couple of additions on the back, hospital wings, basically. It's currently owned by Centerstone, a mental health provider, a service provider, nonprofit, and they have apparently explored options with their architects that they've worked with in the past to renovate it, but are convinced that they can't bring it up to the condition that they need to provide modern services. I'm actually going to be meeting out there with representatives of Centerstone tomorrow, along with Tim Walker from the Metro Historical Commission tomorrow at lunch. We're going to tour the property, talk with Centerstone and their architects about what sort of options they considered, and it's probably too late. As you can see there, this is a sign that was on the building. And it's probably another one that's too late. It is not listed on the National Register, but has been found eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. We'll see what happens. It would obviously, it's in pretty good shape physically. It could be rehabbed into a number of other uses, but I believe the Centerstone is set on keeping the property and removing the building and building under it.
Do you know what kind of trees are those oak trees?
I guess they probably are. I'm not sure.
They're magnificent.
Yeah. It's a very, this picture doesn't really capture the campus. It's a beautiful campus. Right next to 65, right next to the sound barrier wall along 65 that separates Woodland and Waverly from the University.
There's also a little 60s building.
Yeah.
Just to the right of the that's part of the complex as well.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat little mid-century 60s building along with this one. And I guess they would tear that one down too, I'm not sure. The Iser Bloomstein House is on, forgive me if I'm wrong, 5th Avenue South. It is, as far as we know, one of the only remaining buildings related to Jewish history in downtown Nashville that's left. It's currently owned by the property owner is interested in preservation, but has been told a number of times by various parties that it's not reparable, it's not a good candidate for rehab. The interior has been totally gutted or rearranged. It no longer has a historic interior. But the exterior is a nice 19th century brick two-story building with a lot of history as a sort of Jewish community center, fellowship hall. And Historic Nashville has not had much contact with the property owner yet, although it's going there. Obviously, with a sympathetic owner, we have some wiggle room. We'll see what happens. There's no imminent plans to demolish it at this point. I think it's just in pretty bad state of disrepair. On Gallatin Pike, toward Briley Parkway on the west side of the road, is a really nice collection of teens and 20s bungalows and Tudor Revival style houses that are sort of a leftover from when Gallatin Pike was a street, well, when Inglewood was a streetcar suburb and there was a streetcar that went all the way up Gallatin Pike in from downtown. Not many of these houses are left. There is a nice group of them, but they're zoned commercial. You can see this one's for sale and it has a little commercial sign. They have an interesting mix of, there's a few that are attorneys' offices, there's a psychic, you gotta have one of those. But together with this being zoned a commercial district, along with the Gallatin Road, the GRIP improvement plan, I think is what it's called. It's an SP zoning overlay that is intended to guide future development and investment along Gallatin Road. It's very controversial at this point, but there's no specific preservation language in that plan that protects or prevents demolition of these houses. So it has been found eligible to be listed as a district on the National Register. So I believe there's some interest in getting that done to try and provide some level of public awareness and support for preservation. So this is a very real threat because outside of this district, but very nearby and very much of the same vintage of these houses, was the Albert Hadley House, which was just recently demolished to build another U.S. bank branch. This was a picture of houses that was coming down. Albert Hadley lived in this house when he was a child. He was a renowned American interior designer who went on to have a very illustrious career in New York City, where he currently lives. But he's been quoted in interviews and maybe in some of his writings as saying that he got some of his earliest ideas for interior design living in this house on Valley Road. So unfortunately, it just goes to show that these commercially zoned residential properties are very much in danger. Really fun property. Another example of a mid-century modern building that we wanted to represent on the Nashville Nine is this marvelous Earl Swinson design 1961 Imperial House Apartments, very near St. Thomas Hospital. It's kind of off of Harding Pike. You might not ever notice it driving by. My doctor is in St. Thomas, so whenever I'm sitting in his waiting room, I'm looking out at this building. I always wondered about it. It was damaged in the flood. You can see boarded up doors down here on the ground level. In fact, there are still cars that people have abandoned from the flood back actually in the parking lot. It's really neat recovered parking lot with these cantilevered canopies, all reinforced concrete and steel, very much a modern building. Also, and the cantilever canopies are also on the roof, intended to be, for rooftop recreation, hanging out. Really neat, interesting balconies with some sort of like cast iron. You can't see in this photo, but cast iron balcony with banisters with neat decorative details to them. Great mid-century property. And our other mid-century property is the Tennessee Department of Highways and Public Works headquarters on Charlotte Avenue. Those of you that drive up and down Charlotte regularly may recognize it. Very cool 1952 building with this sort of horizontal 50s modern orientation. There is an addition in the back of it that is still being used by TDOT, I believe, as an office building, but obviously they've let this one just go. There's broken windows. Last year there was a newspaper article in the Tennessean quoting a state architect who said it was basically not reparable and needed to be demolished, which is always a shame. We're hoping to work, I need one of my tasks coming up here in the next week or so is to try and start a conversation with the state, with TDOT, the State Historical Commission, Metro Historical Commission, Historic Nashville, try and bring us all together at the same table and say, hey, is there really no other use we can find for this building? Because structurally, it seems to be just fine. Let's all come together and talk about this before we just completely write it off. I think it's designed. I can't remember the name of the architectural firm. I believe they're out of Clarksville at the time. Oops. I'm not a Mac user, excuse me. This, churches are always in danger. We had the Charlotte Avenue Church of Christ last year. This one was submitted by a member of the public as an abandoned church-affiliated community outreach center on Joe Johnson in North Nashville. It's for sale. No plans for it. It's right across the street from Pearl Pond High School. Could very easily be purchased or allowed to deteriorate to the state where it would not be a candidate for preservation. So.
It's across the street from the old Pearl High School.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Right, MLK.
I'm sorry, where is it?
It's on Joe Johnson in North Nashville, across from Pearl High School. Like Pearl High School is immediately this side of the street over here.
Is that next to Watkins Park?
A great circa 1900 church building with plenty of potential for reuse. You can see that I tried getting in touch with the real estate agent, but I never got a call back about what the situation was with the property. But,
Is there a steeple on the previous?
no, there may have been at one point. I'm not sure.
And I'm sorry, did you say it was for sale? I see
It is for sale. And I also attempted to get in touch with Friendship Community Church, which has a website and phone numbers and all, but never got a phone call back.
Is it currently used or is it?
It was most recently this outreach center that appears to be from. I'm not sure what the situation is. So that's the Nashville Nine the past 2 years in a nutshell. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of work. I've gotten to know the city and these sometimes out-of-the-way little resources really well and in detail. We've managed to get quite a bit of press for the program and had a few success stories. Hope to have a few more. And thank you very much for having me. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know, or if you want to talk afterwards, I'd be happy to. Thanks.
David, I have a question.
Sure.
You could answer. You mentioned the word easement. Could you explain what that is so people maybe are not familiar with it and how it's a tool for historic preservation?
Right. A preservation easement, those of you who are familiar with the Land Trust for Tennessee and their conservation easements, it's an identical tool used to protect historic buildings as a voluntary agreement where the owner of the building gives up the right to alter the facade or demolish the building without Historic Nashville's permission. So anytime exterior changes like an addition or window alteration or even a roof, redone roof have to come before Historic Nashville because we own a legal right to make changes to the facade of the building. We own easements on, I believe it's 16 properties, mostly in downtown Nashville. Just a cursory sort of look at those easements. We think we have a market value of somewhere over $30 million worth of easement value in those properties. Several on 2nd Avenue, 5th Avenue, Broadway, and then a few outside of downtown also. But it's a program that, in fact, one of our board members, Bob Tuke, who some of you may know of, he wrote the original easement law. He created the original easement law in, I believe it was 1982 or so, specifically for Historic Nashville to start accepting easements. And it's been very successful. It's a program that during H&I's dormant period of the last decade or so sort of has been not being enforced in terms of regular updates of the properties and making sure property owners are complying with the terms of easements, but that's something that we're currently getting on top of now. And also looking to add new easement properties, so we're always open to talk with property owners in town who might be interested in that. It's a tremendous tax break for the owners because you're significantly reducing the value of your property, so your property taxes go down tremendously. So that's sort of the carrot that we can offer to a property owner who might be interested in taking an easement on the property, or giving an easement to the Historic Nashville, the tax benefits. Yes, Kathleen?
What is the difference between what H&I does and what the Land Trust does? I'm pretty familiar with the Land Trust.
Well, we're really two sides of the same coin, as far as I see it, preservation and natural resource conservation. The Land Trust focuses on what they call open space, green space. So that's, in Tennessee, that means forest and farmland. We often cross paths in our mission, and often those farms have historic structures on them. So their conservation easements might also be preserving historic resources. So the Land Trust recently won an award. I don't remember what the name of the award was, from the National Trust for Historic Preservation at the national conference that just happened in Austin. And H&I, we're having our annual membership meeting at the end of January, January 27th, and all members are invited to come. And if you're not a member, you can come and join at the time. And Jeannie Nelson, the executive director of the Land Trust, is going to come and give us a short presentation, talk about the award that they got and our shared sort of goals between the two organizations. So really looking forward to that. That's January 27th, Thursday evening.
How many properties were submitted for the?
Good question. The first year we had quite a few, something like 32 nominees. This year was far less. I think we had several properties that were nominated a number of times. The Fairgrounds was one that was nominated that we kind of went around and around about whether or not to list. I can't remember exactly, but maybe only a dozen. So between those that were publicly nominated and the ones that are sort of up on our watch list, we came up with this nine. We could probably do a better job of promoting the nomination time period when our website is set up to take nominations, but it's hard to get attention sometimes. I don't know, we can't really account for the difference why we had over 30 the first year and only about a dozen this year.
That was the first time, right?
Yeah.
So what can be, I mean, you know, what can be done to save these buildings besides the obvious? Is it just awareness or funding?
Yeah, well, like I said, this list helps us prioritize, Historic Nashville prioritize where we're going to use our volunteer time to try and find solutions for the buildings. So often myself or another person on our committee, the Nashville Nine committee, will meet with Tim Walker of the Historical Commission, and together we will approach property owners or public officials who have influence on a particular building, and just try and sit down with them and talk about options, talk about our easement program and the financial and tax benefits that can bring if they were to choose that option. Preservation tax credits program, which provides a 20% tax credit for if you follow certain state and federal guidelines for rehabilitation. A lot of times property owners aren't aware that there are these financial incentives out there, so we try to bring those to the table and help them reconsider maybe what the plan is. That's what we did with the Church of Christ, the Charlotte Avenue Church of Christ. That's what we did with Mount Olive Cemetery, and some other properties that we've had conversations with too. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We're just trying to do what we can.
Do churches have to pay property taxes? So the easement on that might not be really effective.
What we came up with Charlotte Avenue Church of Christ was Jason Holloman, the council representative for Sylvan Park, offered them a deal in exchange for not demolishing the church, upzone the rest of their property so that they could build a mixed-use, mixed-use retail and residential development on the rest of the property. It would be a tremendous increase in the property value if they weren't interested in doing that. So, it didn't work out.
I'm curious about, as Historic Inc. moves forward, going from a defunct organization to very active, what type of things would you envision in the future the organization could do to, that it's maybe not capable of right now?
Right. A lot of things. In general, what Historic Nashville needs is a stable, a real street presence. We need an office, and we'd like to rehire a staff person, at least one staff person. We would really like to model ourselves on the success of the organizations like Knox Heritage in Knoxville and Knox County. Knox Heritage has a very, from what I understand, a successful what they call a revolving loan fund, which is a line of credit. Used to be a line of credit, they may even have their own capital now, where they can purchase or put an option on an endangered historic property, rehab it, and then sell it, hopefully at a profit to somebody, and then whatever profit they make, they pile right back into the revolving fund. So properties come in and they go out. That's why it's called a revolving fund. That's a very successful tool that local preservation nonprofits use all across the country, and Knox Heritage has used it too. Tremendous success in Knoxville. That would be, that's really where you're getting into the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of historic preservation, doing something yourself. With H&I's limited sort of capacity as it is right now, we're really just able to negotiate with people, offer our easement incentives, that kind of thing. But I really hope that in the future, in the next 5 years or so, we're more in a position where we can actually take on preservation projects, like with some sort of a goal.
Is there grant money out there somewhere that might assist HNI to?
Probably. There might be partnerships with the National Trust for Historic Preservation has a local partners program. I'm not exactly sure how that all works, but they do provide grants to sort of help people get off the ground, that kind of thing. But they typically don't help you out until you have your own staff person. So as an all-volunteer board, we're looking to that option. But we're working on our strategic plan that we recently developed with the Center for Nonprofit Management and working toward all of these goals.
Any other questions? Thank you, David.
Thanks, everybody.